Got it. Welcome, everyone. This is Stan Campbell from De-escalating Officer Patrol Encounters. Today, we are going to do our first virtual town hall, quarterly virtual town hall. It's really kind of locked out for those that have the Police Encounter app Pro Series, but our first one we're opening up for the public because it's very important information that has to do with recording police officers. We have a special guest that we're going to introduce in a second. But for now, I want to introduce my right hand, Sergeant Rob High. Rob, would you go ahead and take over, please?
Yeah, we are so excited to get this thing going. And like Stan had mentioned, we've got a great guest today. Good friend of ours, Andrew Branca. Andrew's an attorney. He's in his third decade practicing law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He's in his fourth decade as a practicing attorney, and he's internationally recognized as one of the foremost experts in self-defense law in the United States. Andrew has a legal practice, the Law of Self-Defense LLC, and he has been helping law-abiding armed citizens make better, more informed, more decisive decisions in the defense of themselves, their families, and their properties. So you guys can always check him out. He's got a book out, The Law of Self-Defense, that is an amazing read. If you're an armed citizen, if you carry, I would absolutely encourage you to get on and grab a copy of this book. It is absolutely brilliant. So we're going to get into this today and be bringing some information to you about recording police, what your rights are, things to think about. I have no issue with it. I don't think Stan has any issue with it, but it's one of those, there's other things that need to be considered when you're doing this. And it's to keep everybody involved safe and okay and healthy, where everybody's going home. That's the driving force behind everything that we're pressing, is ensuring that everybody has input on your own safety and how to get home. So Andrew, thank you for joining us today, sir. We are so welcome to have you.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I'm always happy to be here.
Yeah. Stan, you want to kick this thing off as we get into this thing?
Yeah, so Andrew's going to get started with his presentation, but every once in a while you'll see myself, and because this has everything to do with, police officers, which, myself and Rob, we're retired officers at this time. We've trained police officers for over 20 years, trained citizens over 20 years, and we absolutely care about you guys doing the right thing and you being legally right, when you're attempting to assist in any way. One thing I want to throw out there just before Andrew gets started, there's one thing, a message always like to give, which is, if there is 2 or 3 cameras that are already recording an officer, and you guys believe that it's some type of brutality, always remember there needs to be someone that calls 911 to try to get the officer some help. That way it does not go into a decline, and you can actually save a life by getting more officers there. That way, an officer doesn't have to make a decision to use deadly force. So please remember that. Be the one to call 911 as well. And Andrew, I'm going to let you start off, and thank you for being here.
Sure, absolutely, my pleasure. So the first thing I should say is, all we can really do in the time available is kind of a quick and dirty overview. This topic could actually be a semester-long class in law school. It's that in-depth, that many variables, because it involves constitutional interests, it involves federal law interests, it involves state-level law interests, it involves the practical imperatives that exist when an officer is involved in making an arrest and being observed by the public. So it's a very, very, very complicated area. In fact, one of the challenges here is that the law is not well developed here. We really only have federal appellate court law for about half the country on this. because it's relatively recently that everyone's been walking around with a camera in their pocket and being in a position to record all this stuff. And it takes years and years and years for things to get to the federal court level in the first place, the appellate court level in the first place. So the law is still kind of catching up with the practical reality of everybody having a camera in their pocket. So what I'd like to do here is kind of put in place the general privilege of recording police, and you do have a general privilege of recording police, but then point out the danger areas where people tend to get into trouble. So people can be aware when they're kind of getting to the borders of what might not any longer be legally privileged.
Yes,
And
sir.
do we know, can folks see the slides I have up?
Yes, sir. We can see it.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the first thing I'll mention is I did set up just a resource page. Let's see. Well, first, the general legal rule in terms of recording the police. So if you're openly recording a police officer in public in the performance of their duty and you're doing it in a safe and non-obstructive manner, that is conduct generally protected by the First Amendment. So as a general matter, you are free to record police in public who are in the performance of their duty if you're doing it in a safe and non-obstructive manner. That's the general rule. But then we have the exceptions, the danger areas where people can get tripped up, and that's what I want to address. I do want to mention that I did set up just a very informal basic resource page for this presentation where I have a copy of these slides. You can download it to your heart's extent. I also list all the federal appellate court case law on this in the various circuits where they have law on this. Again, it's only about half the country, about 26 states. But if you are of a temperament where you like to read appellate court decisions, you're crazy like me, those are all hyperlinked there. So you can read what actual law exists in those circuits on this question. And again, of course, you get the slides there. And that's at lawofselfdefense.com/DOPE. And I'll mention this link again in the last slide of the presentation in case you miss it now. And all that's, of course, entirely freely accessible. All right, so the general rule, you have a general constitutional privilege to openly record police officers in public in the performance of their duty. If you're doing it in a safe and non-obstructive manner, that's protected conduct under the First Amendment, except when, so it's a general privilege, but there are exceptions. No right is absolute, no privilege is absolute. One of those exceptions, and if you look at this sentence as I wrote it, you have that general privilege to openly record police in public in performance of their duty in a safe and non-obstructive manner. All of those are actually conditions on this privilege. One of those conditions is that you're openly recording. Another is that you're doing it in public. Another is that the officer's actually in the performance of their duty. They're acting in an official capacity while you're recording them. And another is that you're doing it in a safe and non-obstructive manner. So all of those are conditions you need to meet to make sure that your recording is in fact protected by the First Amendment. And the first of those danger areas is if you're not openly recording. So openly recording is one thing. Surreptitiously recording is another. If you kind of have your camera hidden off to the side so no one can see you recording, so you're recording both without explicit permission, you didn't ask anybody's permission to record, and the person being recorded would not know they're being recorded. You're not holding the phone up in front of your face, right? Obviously recording them. You're doing it in a surreptitious manner. Well, if you're surreptitiously recording people, you can easily run afoul of wiretapping laws in a great many states. Now, these wiretapping laws are intended to prevent, secretive, surreptitious, unlawful, mostly audio recordings, because these laws are very old and video recordings were not common. So ironically enough, your video portion of your recording may be lawful, even though the audio portion is not, would be unlawful under wiretapping laws. But if you're recording surreptitiously without permission and they wouldn't know they're being recorded, you might be committing a crime, a wiretapping crime, especially if the person who's a party to the communication is unaware. So there's about 20% of the states are what we call, well, they're commonly called two-party states, but it really means all-party states. So if you're making a recording, everyone involved in the recording has to give permission to be in the recording. And if you're recording surreptitiously, you're not doing that. So that could be a criminal offense there. Now, you solve this problem by simply recording openly. So it's not that hard to avoid this danger area, but I want you to be aware that it exists. So if you're recording surreptitiously, you're incurring legal risk that you're not incurring if you're recording openly, just holding up your phone, obviously recording someone. So openly recording or not openly recording is the first danger area. The next is if you're not recording in public. So we all generally imagine these scenarios as the police making an arrest in the street or something along those lines. It's in a public area. That's all fine. But of course, police make arrests. Police are engaged in official conduct in private areas too. They may be called into a bar or a home or a business. And those property owners have their own privilege to restrict your right to make recordings. So if you're on private property, you may not have a privilege to record under the First Amendment, even though you would have that privilege if you were outside the property on the street right in front of the building. Something to keep in mind. Now, it's up to that property owner whether or not they want to assert that right, and they may not want to assert it, but that's not up to you. That's up to somebody else's decision now. Also, if you're in a secure location, like a police station, a jail, a prison, TSA security, for example, there's lots of rules about making recordings in those environments. TSA is kind of ambiguous. They say, well, generally you can record, but you can't record things like our X-ray machine monitors. And so how do you know it's actually being captured on your camera if there's a crisis taking place that you're recording? You may not know. So you have to be careful if you're in a secure area. That may be outside your generalized First Amendment privilege to record the police. If you're not recording a police officer in the performance of their duty. So not every moment a police officer is in uniform is in their performance of the duty. Police officers get breaks too. If a police officer is making a private call to his wife or he's relieving himself in a bathroom, the fact that he has a uniform on doesn't mean he doesn't have a privilege of privacy in those contexts. So if you were making, now, of course, none of us would do this, right? But just pointing it out, it's important to understand that the privilege that's protected by the Constitution is the recording of the officer in the conduct of his legal duties as an official agent of the state. That's what's protected by the First Amendment. And here's a big one. This is probably the biggest one, as well as the next one. If the recording's not being done safely, and safely here is defined extremely broadly. Of course, it means it has to be in a way that's safe for the officer. If you put the officer in peril, the officer's privileged to defend himself. But it means safety in every other context as well. So is the manner in which you're recording unsafe to the suspect? Is it unsafe to the general public? Is it unsafe to you? So are you standing in the middle of a highway to make this recording and this traffic zipping by you? An officer is going to be privileged to stop you from making that recording, not because there's anything inherently wrong with the recording, but because of the manner in which you're making it. You're incurring a life-threatening risk in that context. And the officer would be within his legal privilege to stop you from doing that, not because of the recording, again, but because of the risk that you're incurring. So if you're unsafely making the recording, again, broadly defined, unsafe to anybody, including yourself, you're subject to having that recording being stopped and having that stoppage be lawful for the officer. And closely related, if you're making the recording in such a way that you're obstructing the officer's ability to carry out his lawful duty. Officers are allowed to make arrests. And if you're obstructing the officer's ability to make a lawful arrest in the manner that you're recording, well, he's going to be privileged to stop your recording. Again, not because there's anything inherently wrong with the recording per se, but because of the manner in which you're doing it. So if you're placing yourself so proximate to the action of the arrest that you're interfering with the officer's ability to make what the officer believes is a lawful arrest, and we'll come back to that, then because you're in effect obstructing the officer's legal privilege to carry out his lawful duty, you're committing a crime. You're obstructing justice in that context, and the officer would be privileged to stop your recording if you're doing it in an obstructive way. Now, what if you're doing everything right? Right? We'll presume this. Everyone's a good actor here. They're making a recording. They're not doing it in an unsafe, non-public, obstructive way, and the police decide they don't want you to record anyway. So you're within your rights, we're assuming here, and the police officer is telling you can't record. They're trying to take your phone. They're taking your phone. They're doing things that you believe are in violation of your First Amendment right to make that recording. What are your options there? Well, of course, I mean, there is the theoretical option of actually resisting the officer's conduct towards you. We'll circle back to that in a moment. I don't recommend that for obvious reasons, but short of that, assuming that you're not going to resist in the moment physically, what can you do after the fact? Well, you could complain to the officer's department, and maybe that'll have a consequence or not in terms of your rights. Certainly, for example, if the officer seized possession of your phone, you could hope to get your phone back. You could seek criminal sanction. I mean, if the officer took your phone unlawfully, in theory, that would be a theft. Good luck trying to get a prosecutor to take that case, of course. You could seek some kind of civil compensation. If your phone's taken and you don't get it back, can you get the money value of the phone back? Again, kind of a stretch. You don't tend to see any of those reported in the law because they're not big enough efforts for anyone to really care about. Where the money is here, where lawyers really get involved and money changes hands and police departments or cities end up paying out money, is in civil rights violation suits. And these are federal lawsuits, what we call Section 1983 suits. And they can be brought anytime a government entity violates your civil rights. And this is the common way that police officers, police departments are sued for what the plaintiff, the complainant, would believe is wrongful conduct that violated their civil rights. Most of the case law, and really we only have case law, by which I mean court law, federal appellate court law, kind of outlining the boundaries of all this. These are all Section 1983 cases. So these are cases where someone cared enough to bring it to federal court. And we not only to federal trial court, but then get a federal appeal of whatever the verdict was in that court. The federal appellate courts analyze whatever the trial court proceedings were and come out with a framework of rules. These are all civil suits, Section 1983 suits, where people are seeking money. And the trouble with that approach is it is where the money is, and it's where you need money to get to. So someone has to care enough to actually make this conflict you may have had with an officer while you were attempting to record a federal case. And that's probably not the individual. I mean, normally some larger organization would get involved to make a federal case out of this. Something like the ACLU would get involved, somebody with the money and expertise to actually fight a federal case. And even if you get into federal court to argue this, the legal threshold is pretty high. Generally, the legal threshold is that the police officer involved either knew he was violating your civil rights, or he should have known he was violating your civil rights. And in this context, that can be difficult to prove, in part because the law is still so ambiguous here. Again, we only have federal case law for about half the states on this. The other half of the states, I expect once we get federal case law on this, it will be the same general rule. You have general privilege to record so long as you're doing it safely and so forth. But in the moment, we don't have established federal case law on this. And have it, it's hard to expect a police officer to know it. Remember, officers only know what they're trained on. They're not trained on case law that doesn't yet exist. So it can be very difficult to prove that the officer knew or should have known he was violating your civil rights when the officer wasn't trained on that. Remember, officers are just human beings too. They really only know what they've been trained on. Sorry, folks, I'll pull that right back up. I hit the wrong button there. There we go. Are we back? Okay, great. So getting some kind of compensation through a 1983 suit is not something I would have you assume is a practical or timely resolution, but it's really probably the only way we're going to get established law on this, unambiguous law on this, in all 50 states in the long run. Something to keep in mind is that when an officer arguably has engaged in misconduct in this way, unlawfully prohibited someone from making a recording, it's really the officer's department who is the target of the complaint, because the department is where the money is. The officer doesn't have any money to take, really. So often the officer, in fact, is relieved of any liability under a legal doctrine called qualified immunity, and then it's the department that's held accountable. But all these suits take years and years and years to come to fruition. Unfortunately, that's just a practical part of how all this works. And another practical aspect, of course, are ultra legal risks. Now, in a moment, I'm going to ask the officers in this discussion to put in their 2 cents, because this is really where they come in. But from my perspective as an attorney, the law is ambiguous here, and officers may not be adequately trained on a lot of this, especially if there's no well-established law in their particular jurisdiction, which is true for about half the country. So a given officer may not be adequately trained. He may not know he's violating your rights by not letting you record. He may think he's allowed to do that. Alternatively, you may run into the very rare officer who just doesn't care what your rights may be. I mean, that's not at all common, but officers are human beings like everybody else. We have a bell curve. Some of them are, maybe not the peers we'd like them to be. So you could be running into that kind of situation as well. And again, you could be recording within your rights, and yet an officer constrains your conduct. And as I mentioned, the legal options for you there are not in the moment. They tend to be years away. They tend to be federal court cases. They tend to be things that happen well into the future. So, in the moment, what are your options? What are you prepared to exercise as an option? And this is where we get into real practical risks, because let's face it, you may not know exactly what's going on when you see that arrest. You may believe in good faith that that officer is engaged in wrongful conduct, but he may not be. He may know facts that you don't know, especially in something as dynamic as a physical fight, a confrontation between an officer and a suspect. He may be aware of weapons in play or weapons in possession by the suspect that you haven't seen because they're concealed, but the officer may know. So the decisions he's making in using force in that suspect may appear unreasonable to a casual observer, but be very reasonable once all the facts were known. But you're not going to know all the facts in the moment. Possibly.
Hey, Andrew, can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
So, Andrew's absolutely right. And, from the police perspective, I mean, and I want you guys to know, I mean, we're talking about um, close to 18,000 agencies across the nation, with close to 950,000 police officers across the nation, collectively. Each one of these departments act independent of each other, and the majority of departments are 20 officer and less police departments. It's not the large ones that you see on the police department. I mean, on the social media.
Sometimes they're 10 or 5 officers. I mean, they're tiny.
Absolutely. So, so many times, they may not even be aware of the law or have the training or understanding that what they're doing is wrong. To them, if they're in especially a physical confrontation, has someone on the ground trying to arrest them, and they see someone starting to crowd them, although, the weapon in hand is a telephone. There are many times that you may get too close, and Andrew might, talk about that as well. But you'll get too close. They're trying to do something, and to them, you are interfering with, what they're doing and them trying to make the arrest. So you're not going to get really a welcome response by an officer that, like Andrew said, is human, who also gets scared, in these moments when there is a physical confrontation. So you never know what that response is going to be. That's why it's really important to make sure you keep your distance, for one. And like Andrew said, you really don't know. Many times, by the time you pull your phone out and hit the record button, there's so many things that have gone on in these few seconds that you may not be aware of. The angle that you're in, you might not be able to see what's truly going on. Like Andrew said, and there's many times that we've struggled with people that we knew had weapons, and you don't know this, and we're trying to struggle to get them into custody, get them in handcuffs, so that we don't have to hurt anybody. Most officers, the large majority, want to just go home. No one wants to be dirty. No one wants to go to hospital. No one wants to have use of forces. And in this day and age, they definitely don't want to do anything to cause them to be caught on camera and make themselves look bad. Rob, you going to answer anything to that?
No, we can touch on that here in a little bit. The big deal for me is the proximity to the officer. That really does become a great risk for the officer involved, because you've diverted his attention now, and he's not just dealing with the situation at hand, which could be an assault on him that had gone on before you ever even got there. So you don't have the entire story. And suddenly now you're up close and personal, and you're looking at this thing, and it's just like, oh my gosh, this looks horrible. Well, a fight looks horrible. A use of force looks horrible. I don't have any issue with anybody coming in and recording the thing, but not every officer has that level of training and skill that they can kind of maintain a position for a minute and start giving verbal direction to somebody that's walked up with a phone out in their hand. Most of these guys are fully involved and completely unaware of what's going on. And then the next thing you know, there's somebody that's inside of 10 feet, and they're, kneeled down, they got a camera, and they don't necessarily recognize what's in that hand at first. And you may end up on the other end, the wrong side of a gun, because you startle that officer who's already in a bad way, and he sees somebody else. He doesn't know that that guy's not coming up to join in with the guy he's trying to control already. So distance is a huge factor for me. That's really the biggest thing for me at all. And Standard touched on this a little earlier. To me, the biggest deal is get more bodies there, get more help there. So be the guy that gets on 911. Can I record audio, or I'm sorry, can I make a phone call at the same time that I'm recording video? I can. Not everybody understands that. And the big deal for me is, even if it's not just another officer, I don't like what I'm seeing here. Can you send a supervisor to come investigate this? That's a big deal.
Yeah. So, and I want to reinforce, officers who are acting lawfully, as by the way, the vast majority are, shouldn't have any objection to anyone making a recording. And generally, in my experience, the officers I know don't have any objection to anyone making a recording, as long as it's being done in that safe, unobstructive way. They get concerned when it's unsafe, and when it becomes obstructive, becomes a potential threat, then anybody would be concerned, not about the recording per se, but about the manner in which it's being done. My next few comments should not be interpreted as attempting to discourage anyone from making recordings. I want you to make recordings in a safe and unobstructive way. If you're doing that, there's no problem, or there ought to be no problem. So I'm not trying to discourage anyone from making a recording, but even if you are making a recording in a safe and unobstructive way, you might still potentially get a hassle from a particular police officer for a variety of reasons, some good, some not good. Maybe the officer perceives a lack of safety where you don't. There's a disagreement there. That can certainly happen. So he may begin taking steps to ensure safety. Steps you may perceive are not necessary because you don't see a safety risk. Again, different people having different perspectives. In any case, imagine that you're making a recording in what you see as a lawful way, and you're encountering resistance from an officer. They're telling you not to, they're obstructing your view, they're attempting to take your phone from you, whatever the case might be, and you think that's wrongful conduct. What do you do then? And the reason I'm raising this is because I think it's important for people to think this through. Imagine if you're ever in that situation, you're making that kind of recording, what are you prepared to do? And do you understand the consequences? I don't tell people what to do. I just want people to make decisions in a well-informed way, think it through ahead of time, and not make their decisions in the heat of the moment without having thought about it before, because we don't tend to make better decisions in the heat of the moment. We tend to make worse decisions. I mean, if you're pulled over in your car and you're getting a speeding ticket or whatever, ticket from a patrol officer, do you argue about that ticket there on the side of the road, or do you take the ticket, say, thank you, sir, and argue it out in court if you think it was a wrongful ticket? The smart play is to not argue about it on the side of the road. I've never heard of anybody who got out of a ticket by arguing about it on the side of the road. There's no upside there, except maybe to vent your spleen, hardly productive. You argue about that kind of thing in court. And I would suggest the same is true if things turn confrontational when you're making a recording on a scene. If you're making that recording and you start getting static from a particular officer on the scene, do you disregard his orders to get further back from orders from an officer? If you believe in good faith, those orders are unlawful, that you're already back enough, but he disagrees, do you not get further back? What if he seeks to compel your compliance with those orders, to push you back further? Do you resist his use of force? Do you counter with your own force? I mean, how far are you prepared to escalate this confrontation to make that recording? Again, I'm not telling people what to do. I want people to be aware of how these things tend to escalate, so you're making your decisions in a well-informed way and not.
Hey, Andrew, on that first point about getting back, because one thing we talked about was the fear is people crowding the officer,
Yep.
regardless of what's in your hand. Now, the common sense thing, and like what I want to tell citizens, absolutely record. We released the police encounter app. It automatically starts recording for you, right? We want you guys to record, but once you do it safely and not get in the way of the officer, you back away like he's saying, and then zoom it in. you don't have to be 3 feet away to see what you need to see. Zoom in, you can still get the same shot that you had and be 10 feet away so that the officer does not believe that there is a risk of him being harmed. And then you can record it like you just need to. So that's one of the things that you need to think about doing. Um, and lock that in, right? Go ahead, continue, Andrew. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to point out that if someone presents, not that they have to be this, but if they create the appearance of presenting as a dangerous threat to a police officer, that officer is likely to use serious force in defense of himself and defense of others. And you can find yourself seriously injured or killed, even though in actuality, all you had was a phone in your hand or whatever the case may be. If it could have been perceived in the stress of the moment as a weapon, that officer may well use a weapon in defense of what appears to be to him an actual threat. So you do not want to present as a potential danger to the officer. And the best way to avoid doing that is to maintain a reasonable distance from what's being filmed. Proximity is lethal, especially when it comes to things like impact weapons, like knives, fists, feet. If someone's a certain distance away, police aren't that concerned about them being present and recording. But if someone closes, and unfortunately, what often happens is you might have a crowd of people recording, and one person moves a little closer, and then the next person moves a little closer because their view is blocked, and then the next person moves even closer, and the crowd begins to encroach closer and closer to the scene of the action to the point where no individual intended to present themselves as a threat to the officers, but the collective action of the crowd begins to be reasonably perceived by the officers as threatening, and then we have bad outcomes that didn't have to happen, and we don't want to have happen to anybody.
Hey,
Oh,
hey, Danielle, could you, and sorry about the interruption. Uh, is that Damar? Damar has a question, correct? Okay, he raised his hand. So, hey, Danielle, can you unmute him for a second so he can ask his question?
Danmar, you can unmute yourself if you just click the microphone button. It should let you on your end.
Okay, cool. It's more of a statement. First of all, I want to say I appreciate this Zoom or and the open forum that you guys are having. But I think that you guys are, from what I've heard, I've been on here, I don't know, maybe about 3 or 4 minutes. It seems like you guys are speaking from an officer's perspective, not an officer. I've had very bad interactions with officers, and I'm a law-abiding citizen. A lot of times, or in my experience with myself and people that I know, the perceived threat is the recording. When you say get back, or a citizen attempting to record an interaction with law enforcement and another citizen, and the officer is saying get back, the threat is the video. So when they're saying get back, they don't want to be recorded.
Got you.
Everyone knows.
And then Damar, I don't know if you heard me when I stated to absolutely continue to record, right? I
Yes.
said you get back and zoom in. So you move back the footage that the officer's saying, because you don't want to get pulled into this confrontation. And believe it or not, a lot of us have had bad interaction. I was a police officer 20 years, and I had bad interaction with police officers. Growing up in New Jersey, and even as an officer off duty, I've been challenged by police. So, we are given the perspective of police, not just police officers, but police trainers, and also our experiences. And what we're trying to do is, and the focus of the de-escalating officer patrol encounters is to educate citizens to where the lines are, so that you don't step over them, get yourself in trouble by being arrested or even brought into a physical confrontation or a deadly force incident. Because that's the
or if
goal,
you're
is to decrease them.
or if
Okay.
you're stepping over the line, you're doing it in an informed way. I mean, I'm not telling anyone not to record. I'm not telling anyone not to record, even if it means you get arrested. I mean, that's up to you. What risk you're willing to take. I just want you to make that decision in an informed way. This could escalate. If you're dealing with an officer who perceives the video itself as the threat, that's precisely the kind of officer who would tend to escalate the confrontation, right?
Absolutely.
I agree. And a lot of times, in most times, in my experience and experience of people that I know, the officer is the aggressor. No normal person is going to be the catalyst in a confrontation with a police officer. Police officer has qualified immunity. Police officer has a gun.
Mhm.
No normal person is going to have a confrontation with them. If they are initiating a confrontation, then clearly something is wrong with them. But
Yeah.
that's not what I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to the officer who has all of the law on their side, has the weapon with them, and they are the aggressors.
Mhm.
I think it's Andrew. You made a comment earlier that I totally disagree with, and you said, and I forget exactly what it was now. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Just paraphrase. It's okay. I won't take
I'm
offense.
trying to have to. No, I didn't think you would. Oh, you said all officers aren't bad. In my opinion and in my experience, if there's one bad officer and the other officers aren't doing everything in their power to get rid of that officer, then they're all bad.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
You
I
are
would,
complicit. Let me finish.
Yeah.
Please
Sure.
let me
Go ahead.
finish. If you're not helping get rid of one bad officer,
Mhm.
then you're complicit.
Got you.
If you turn your head, if you cover it up, if you're like, this is my partner, he has a life, he has a family, I don't want to destroy or hurt any of that, and you don't do everything in your power to get rid of that bad apple, you are complicit, and you are also a bad apple. I'm a
Okay.
mute because I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Got you. Hey, Andrew, and you really can't speak on that because that's really a police officer thing. Um, um, Denmark, well taken. We respect your position, and we cannot take any of your experiences away. If they've all been negative, that's what they are, right? Like I said, we understand that officers are human and that there are some that are bad. And you are right. You know, officers should be informed on more than they are. There is a system in place that we all disagree with, and they're sometimes protected by supervisors, by command staff. They're moved around. None of us, agree with that. Doesn't mean that the officers are all bad, because there are many officers that inform on others, but it goes nowhere. So the system is broken. Okay. So I don't want you to attack the overall majority because I spoke about the amount of officers that are there. I study these, and we'll end with deadly force incidents. There's about 1,000 deadly force incidents per year. There's 900,000 officers. If they were all out to kill us, there'd be 900,000 deaths a year. It's not that way, right? So it's a numbers game. But what the media pushes forward, of course, and we're not going to. This can be another discussion, and we can have a sidebar as well, Damar. But the media pushes out what they want you to see, and there's about 20 to 40 instances that nationwide they become viral videos and they're pushed out each year. And that's not the majority of the incidents, but they are the viral videos. But what I want to do is give Andrew a chance to finish up this presentation because we are going to talk about, you know, instances where you need to learn from the mistakes of others so that you don't get arrested, because there are places in the nation that you can get arrested for doing so. And thank you for your contribution, brother.
yeah, and I would just, yeah, that was great, Dan. I really appreciate that. And I would say from my perspective, listen, there's wrongs I would see committed that I wouldn't mind getting arrested for videotaping. I mean, getting arrested is not the end of the world. Sometimes you need to get arrested. I mean, that's just the way life is sometimes. Um, but so I'm not trying to tell people, hey, record up to the point you get arrested. If you want to record past the point where you're going to be arrested, that's up to you. I don't have any moral objection to that. That's fine. I just want you to be aware that that's one of the risks you could be incurring. So you're making an informed decision. So you're prepared to accept that consequence, and then of course pursue your legal options after that. And I just want people to keep in mind there's this continuum, a spectrum from, on one end, simply being kind of a passive good witness, right? Standing at a distance that the cops are happy with and making a recording on one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum where you're being more aggressive, being closer than they want, being more what they would perceive as more confrontational than the police are happy with. And people can choose where they want to be on that spectrum. But one end has a relatively low legal risk and the other end has higher legal risk that you're incurring, things like arrest. Again, I don't tell people where they should be. That's up to you. But I want you to be aware of the risks you're incurring when you make that decision of how aggressive you're prepared to be to record that police interaction. Again, as I said at the beginning, we all have a generalized constitutional right to record police in public in the course of their legal duties, so long as we're doing it in a safe and unobstructive way. That's been recognized by every court that's considered the question so far. Where things tend to get touchy is when it's ambiguous about whether it's safe or obstructive or in public or all those conditions I just mentioned. So you have that generalized First Amendment right. We all have it. And it's an important right, by the way. It's how we keep the government accountable. That's why the First Amendment exists in the first place, is so we can all speak to holding the government accountable. And that applies to police officers just like it does to Congress or the president or the U.S. Supreme Court or any other facet of government. So it's a very important legal privilege. But no legal privilege, one, is without constraint. Even the First Amendment is subject to time, place, manner restrictions, borders on how far it extends. And of course, then there's the real world practicality risks of, is the situation ambiguous? Is the law ambiguous? Is the officer properly trained so he even knows what your rights are? Is it one of those officers who just doesn't give a crap what your rights are? You can run into that guy as well. And so you need to be aware of what the practical consequences can be depending on how aggressive you are in making the recording. Again, I don't tell people where to draw their personal line. Draw it where you think is most appropriate. That's your decision to make. Just do it in an informed way is the only thing I ask. And my very last slide, it's not substantive. Again, I just set up that resource page for those who are interested. So it provides all the federal case law that's on this issue of recording the police. Unfortunately, we only have case law for about half the country right now because it takes years for this stuff to get up to the federal courts. And a copy of these slides I presented here, you can download the copy of those slides, and you can access all that at lawofselfdefense.com/DOPE. And it's all free. It's all freely accessible. All right, Stan, that's about all I have, although, of course, I'm happy to answer questions.
Absolutely. Rob, you have some set questions for them so that we can follow up on certain things that we want to get across to the audience as well.
I do. And there's a couple of things that came out. Andrew, you brought up, Danmar mentioned this as well. Can you give our folks a quick, again, we could do a whole college semester on this, but just a quick Reader's Digest version of what qualified immunity is for a police officer?
Sure. So qualified immunity is a kind of an odd legal concept. It was created by the courts themselves. It's not typically in statutory form, although I guess some states may have a qualified immunity statute. But it's a court doctrine that the courts created, and the rationale behind it, and I don't want to argue about the rationale because I didn't create it, but this is the rationale presented by the courts, is that essentially every time a police officer, for example, goes hands-on with a suspect, they're arguably committing a physical battery of that person, right? If you put your hands on someone else without their permission, that's normally a criminal battery. So every time an officer does that, he's arguably committing a criminal battery, which could be a civil offense as well as a criminal offense. And that officer could be sued every time he touches a suspect, which he might do a dozen or 20 times a day, depending on the jurisdiction that he's in. And there's no way an officer getting paid whatever patrol officers are paid these days can defend against 12 or 20 civil suits a day. So essentially what the courts have said is, listen, maybe that officer acted wrongfully. We don't know. Maybe they did. But if you want to go after someone, go after his department. And in any case, that's where the money is. So they immunize the officer for that conduct, but they leave the department subject to a civil suit for that wrongful conduct. Because in theory, the department has the money and the lawyers and so forth to defend those kinds of claims. Now, if the officer engages in conduct that's clearly a violation of somebody's rights, then the officer is still vulnerable to civil suit and criminal prosecution. It's not in theory, it's not a carte blanche, get out of jail free card for the officer. Now, what's happened with qualified immunity is a lot of people perceive, and I'm not sure they're wrong, that the courts apply it much too liberally, that they should constrain it much more than it is. Yeah, I think that's a perfectly reasonable argument. I think it's beyond the scope of today's talk, but that's how qualified immunity, in theory, is supposed to work.
Awesome. And Danmar, we'll get to you in a second, bro. We're going to get through a couple of these questions. Andrew, does law enforcement officers need a warrant to access any recordings made by citizens or does exigent circumstances apply? And what is that?
I mean, these are all legal arguments that are made after the fact. So in the moment, the officer is either going to seize the recording or not seize the recording. And then you argue in court later whether or not that seizure was lawful or not. Of course, if you're against the seizure, you would argue that he should have had a warrant to do it. And if you're in favor of the seizure, you'll argue that exigent circumstances excluded the requirement for a warrant in that case. But those are arguments that are going to be made, very fact specific arguments. So tiny changes in facts from one situation to another are going to change the legal outcome. Plus, it's a human being. It's a judge making the final call, and human beings make judgment calls. They perceive facts differently. They come to any individual set of facts with their own biases and preconceptions. So it's not like ahead of time what the outcome is going to be. It all depends on what judge's decision, what arguments he heard, what arguments were made. But all of that happens well after the property's already been taken or not taken.
Okay, something else I'd like you to touch on a little bit, because I'm well within my rights. I roll up on this thing, and there's a police officer that I don't know what started, but from the time I first witnessed this, and I become involved, at least with my presence, and all of a sudden it's like, man, this looks terrible, and I start recording. Is there anything that would prevent the police from seizing my phone? Because if I think it's a crime, I have evidence of a crime. And due to the exigency that I could eliminate this, is that a possibility? Is that something that I come up on this thing, and this guy's involved over here, but I don't see his partner over to the side, and all of a sudden, when this thing all kind of calms down, they come over and go, by the way, we're taking your phone.
As evidence of
evidence,
the,
yes.
of the forceful officers, excessive
Yes.
use of force, for example. Sure, of course, that could happen.
Yes.
So you can imagine a scenario where you have an exceptionally bad cop who's clearly using excessive force on a suspect. Other cops roll up, recognize it as unlawful conduct. They're going to arrest and charge that officer for a crime, and they're aware that you've made a recording of that crime. Sure, they could seize that recording as evidence of the crime they intend to prosecute. Now, the difficulty, of course, is often the person who's making the recording doesn't believe that they're seizing the recording for that lofty purpose. They may believe the officers are seeking to seize the recording to bury the recording. And then you get to that kind of situation I'm talking about, which is, to what degree are you prepared to physically resist what the officer is telling you to do? Because that gets violent, and violence is dangerous. Not telling people not to do it, just telling people to be aware.
Correct. Just understand what's out there and what could happen from this thing. And the reason I bring that up is, even though it's something that you don't see in the press, it's not something you see a great deal of. Stan and I have been in that position to step in and go, nope, that's too much. We're both experts in the field of use of force. So when it comes time to see things like that, a news blurb comes out, we call each other and we immediately, but we're human. And naturally, our first reaction is an emotional reaction. Because it's one of those things that you look at it and go, oh my God. But then once everything shakes out and you start getting the facts of the case and all of the evidence, is like, that explains it. I'm okay with it. Or there's absolutely no way to explain away what you've just seen. But we can't always tell that in a 15-second clip on the news.
Yeah, that's just like in the South Carolina case where the man that was being arrested by the officer was shot in the back, and that officer ended up getting, I think, a little bit more than 20 years to do. That was absolutely murder. I mean, all of those are few and far apart. I mean, there are some that, I mean, there are officers with bad intent. All those is a small percentage, and when those are caught on tape, the system does do what it's supposed to do. Now, is the system working all the time? Absolutely not. There's too much darkness. There's too many people covering for each other. We absolutely, one of the things about, and Robin, I mean, I'll tell you right now, I love the police. I didn't always love the police. I don't love all the police. But, when we created the Police Encounter app, we made sure that when you make that recording, and even once it's stopped, it immediately gets launched over to 3 of your loved ones that you choose. So the officer can't even, delete the video. And we do that on purpose so that if you have something that truly is bad, we want you to have that and other people to have it without you having to go through the means of fighting the officers for it. They take it for evidence. Well, it may be gone, but it's not gone because it got sent away immediately as soon as they hit stop. So, we care about citizens being treated right. We care about officers being treated right. We care about the lives of everyone. Someone has to do something, and that's the reason why we took this upon ourselves to start going against the grain and educating the office citizens about what their responsibility are, what their rights are, and what they can do to protect themselves, and the right way to complain on officers so they don't get themselves hurt or arrested. And we're proud of that. So we really want you guys to like look into that, and just do the right thing, because at the end of the day, like Damar said, there's a man that has that's protected by, man or woman, protected by the government, and has a weapon on his hip. So
Yeah, and I can tell you, I mean, as a criminal defense
they're in a
attorney,
good position.
I love video. I want all the video I can get my hands on, because if the more video we have, the more truth is revealed. And that's ultimately what I'm looking for. And if my client is innocent, I want every second of video that's available to me. And if there's 40 people making videos, I want all of it. I want every single bit of it. Now, if it turns out the video is incriminating of my client, well, then they acted unlawfully. And that's true whether it's a civilian or whether it's a law enforcement, and then they have to bear the consequences for what they did wrong. But if they were acting within the bounds of the laws, many of my clients are, I want that video, because often it's the video that makes the difference between being able to present a jury with a fact-based narrative of what happened, as opposed to just a he said, she said, where it's a guess as to what actually happened.
Got you. And then, hey, Danielle, Damar had one more question before we wrap this up. Can we allow him to get that one question in, and then we'll give him his answer, and then we'll close it out for the day?
Yep, Denmark, can you go ahead and press the microphone on your end?
It's so funny hearing Damar is the name of my company. It's
Okay.
actually Duncan, but I realize it's there, but it's not a big deal. I just it's not so much a question. I just, in these forums, we don't necessarily, I know I don't necessarily get the ears of people like yourselves. So I kind of want to say what I'm saying, because maybe it'll mean something at another time. You know what I'm saying? So I just wanted to speak to qualified immunity. In my ignorant terms, it just means the police officers have the law. You know what I'm saying? So, and it's like a circle. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're talking about video and the right to record, and an officer saying get back or whatever. When you need the Information Act to get the cam, the body cam, and it's so much drama having to try to get those videos, but you have a phone and you can get the video right away. So you have your own accounting of the interaction, and the police try to suppress that by taking your phone, telling you to get back. In my mind, I believe they know that it's going to be difficult for citizens to get the cam. So just like Andrew said, as a defense attorney, you want all of the video, because the video is going to tell the story. And police officers are trying to suppress the videos. Like, I'm gonna go real left right here. Like with George Floyd, I don't believe that, and I'm gonna say this, preface my statement. I don't believe that all officers are just choking people out like he did. You know what I'm saying? Like the officers that killed Mr. Floyd did. But the ones that are breaking the law, they know that without a video, they're gonna get off. So let's suppress the video before you get a chance to have. I mean, in New York, I'm in New York now. They changed the law. You can't even record. Like, if you record, you may be prosecuted. That's a felony if you record police interactions. So, but people aren't going to see their loved ones and their friends and whomever get killed by the police, so they run
Mm,
the risk of recording it. You understand what I'm saying?
absolutely.
So
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
so that's
And,
the thing. I just wanted to put
yeah.
that out there, and I'm sorry for being so long with
No, bro. It's okay because the part of what we're trying to do here, and this is our first one in reference to the virtual town hall, and it's going to continue to get bigger, and we're going to cover more things. And so obviously we need to cover qualified immunity a little bit more, and these changes. But the one thing you got to remember as well, because don't forget you're speaking on one side as well. You talked about the officers suppressing. A lot of people with social media, the way the internet is set up, people want to go viral. So what they do is they give the edited version. They're only going to give the bite that looks the worst to them so that they can get the most play. So in fairness, we have to admit that there's more of the story. Even when you think of, because I've always been and I started ending my career. I left in 2012 after 20 years as a lieutenant. And that's when they first started wearing the body cams. I think the federal government should step in and make every officer wear the body cam. I'm okay with body cams. The problem with body cams, though, if I am facing you right now with my body cam, if this is it, this is my body cam, this is what you're going to see. But when my head turns, you don't see what I see, only when my body turns, right? So the body camera is not always, it's not the end all be all, right? It's not the whole story. Many times we act like Rob said emotionally because these are emotions. And I'm going to tell you right this. I'll admit because I've done it. I did it on the news before. I've done a brief on George Floyd the day of the incident. I cried for that. Okay. Many officers cried for that, not just for the man because it was a horrible thing that happened to him. Not just for the man, for the system, for the backlash that was going to happen. Because every time we move it forward, be it police athletic league, whatever we do, barbecues, baby dolls, you know, basketball that we do to try to connect and bridge the gap with citizens, one of those videos knocks us back another 10 years. We will never be able to connect properly until somebody says, okay, enough's enough. And it has to happen on both sides. I always talk about, and I'm going to end with this, and I have to end with this, sorry. You can own, it's not one person's responsibility to de-escalate. It takes two because it's human conflict. If you continue, and you said Duncan, I believe. Duncan, if you continue, I don't know you, but if you continue to push when I pull away, that is not de-escalation. I'm going to have to, move back into a self-defense position. Citizens, I need you guys to remember it takes two to de-escalate. And the other thing is, don't do the stuff on the curbside. Properly, you're not going to fix the system. It's going to take 50 to 100 years to fix the system. It's effed up, right? It just is broken. And it's going to take officers that have a different mindset to come up and the other ones that actually sipped from the color water fountain to be gone, right? It's going to take a while. We got a ways to go. But forums like this, us interacting with each other, it's going to help. All right. Guys, we're gonna go ahead and close this out. This was D.O.P.E.'s police encounter apps first, virtual town hall. Join us again next quarter. We're gonna have a different expert come in and give us some things. And as Andrew said, please go to lawofselfdefense.com/dope, and you can download all of these things. And he has some things that you can research as well in reference to recording police to keep yourself out of trouble. And that's dope. Thanks a lot, guys, and I appreciate your time. Thanks,
See you
Duncan.
guys next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Danielle. You can stop the recording now.
Okay, I'm trying.
Andrew, thanks for your time, and I'll connect with you offline, okay?
Sure. My pleasure. Hope it was useful.
I think it was. I think that was great interaction.
All right.